They had the entire wizarding world in their hands, and they fumbled it. Fantastic Beasts was supposed to be the next magical chapter, the bridge between nostalgia and something fresh. Instead, it became a masterclass in how to confuse your audience, break your own rules, and lose the loyalty of even the most die-hard Potterheads. What happened? From marketing bait and switches to behind-the-scenes chaos and silent disappearances, this franchise didn't just miss the mark, it forgot where the target even was. And what you're about to hear might change the way you see this saga forever. When Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them first hit theaters, fans were practically levitating with excitement. Some even expected it to be the next Harry Potter level phenomenon. The trailer gave us magical creatures, young Dumbledore on the horizon, and that sweet nostalgic hit of the wizarding world. But you know what they say? Expectations are just premeditated disappointments. The truth is, what started as a promising expansion of a beloved universe slowly turned into, well, a cinematic shrug. It's like buying a chocolate frog and finding out it's just a regular toad. People wanted answers, mystery, maybe even some good old Hogwarts politics. What they got was a shy magizoologist chasing magical beasts through New York City like some kind of eccentric Pokemon trainer. And while Newt was charming, yes, we see you, Eddie Redmayne, he didn't exactly scream lead character of an epic saga. The story felt small, even when it tried to be big. It was like J.K. Rowling brought us back to the party, but forgot the cake. The fans came in with their wands out, hoping to duel with destiny, uncover secrets, and connect the dots between Grindelwald and Voldemort's future chaos. Instead, the dots were more like breadcrumbs scattered by a confused house elf. The narrative didn't seem to know where it wanted to go, and the audience could feel that. That confusion drained the magic from the room faster than a Dementor on espresso, and slowly but surely, interest started to vanish, just like Credence's backstory logic. There's a particular frustration in seeing something with so much potential trip over its own cloak. Warner Brothers had the keys to a gold mine, but instead of digging deeper, they just kept repainting the surface. Each new film felt like a gamble. Maybe this one will be better? Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Fans who once lined up in robes and scarves began quietly ghosting the franchise. One confused plot twist at a time. And here's where things get spicy. The disappointment didn't come from a bad premise, but from the execution. And that, my friend, leads us to the real twist in this saga. Not the creatures, not the spells, but a strategic blunder that shaped everything else that followed. Here's the thing. Trying to tell the story of a global wizarding war through the eyes of Newt Scamander was like asking your quirky vet to explain World War II. Sure, he knows animals, but dark wizard geopolitics? Not exactly his field. The audience kept waiting for Newt to somehow become the hero of the big conflict, but he never really did. He was just there. Charming, sure, but narratively, he felt like the guy who wandered into the wrong movie. The franchise promised magical creatures and oddball adventures, and the first film delivered that. But then it pulled a sneaky U-turn and started building a political epic without ever telling the audience, hey, heads up, this isn't just about Nifflers anymore. It's like being invited to a zoo tour and ending up at a UN Security Council meeting. People were confused, and confused people don't buy tickets. They complain on Reddit. This disconnect created a huge identity crisis for the series. Was it about Newt and his suitcase zoo? Or was it about Grindelwald and wizard fascism? The answer was kind of both, but not really either. And that indecision made everything feel muddy. A strong narrative needs clear stakes, but these films kept throwing plot threads like spaghetti at a wall, hoping one would stick. Imagine if Star Wars had started with Luke cleaning droids for 3 whole movies, only hinting at Darth Vader in the background. That's how it felt. Grindelwald, this looming dark wizard, was mostly talked about rather than truly feared, at least at first. And poor Newt, bless his introverted soul, was never built to carry that kind of epic weight. It was like asking a Hufflepuff to win the Tri-Wizard tournament with a toothbrush. And this entire problem, this strange choice of focal point, snowballed into a series that never knew what it was selling. The trailer said, creatures. The plot said, politics. And the fans said, wait, what? Which leads us directly into the next mess. When a title promises one thing, and the story goes somewhere else entirely, well, now we're talking about a classic case of conceptual whiplash. J.K. Rowling once said the title, Fantastic Beasts, had a double meaning, referring to both the magical creatures and the metaphorical human beasts. And hey, that sounds clever in theory. But here's the problem. Clever doesn't always mean clear. The average moviegoer wasn't sitting there decoding literary nuance. They were expecting a whimsical beast-hunting adventure, not an allegory about the monsters within. It was like ordering pumpkin juice and being handed a glass of existential dread. Originally, the idea was to make it a sort of magical National Geographic, a fake documentary with Newt as the eccentric explorer. And honestly, that would have been fun. Picture Newt narrating over magical wildlife footage like, "Here we observe the mating habits of the elusive thunderbird." But no. Somewhere along the way, they tossed that concept into the pensive and decided to build an epic war saga instead, without changing the name, or telling the audience. So now we've got this cheerful-sounding title on a franchise that's trying to be the godfather of wizard politics. Imagine naming a political thriller Snuggles and Rainbows. No one's gonna take it seriously. The tone was all over the place. Cute creatures in one scene, dark speeches about wizard supremacy in the next. It was like going from Sesame Street to Game of Thrones without warning. And that tonal confusion? It didn't just mess with viewers' expectations. It fractured the identity of the entire series. People didn't know what they were watching, or why they should care. Was it about Newt? Was it about Dumbledore? Was it about Credence? Or just a metaphorical thesis paper wrapped in CGI? When audiences feel lost, they don't get curious, they check out. But the consequences of this narrative flip-flopping weren't just theoretical. The numbers don't lie, and the box office sure had a lot to say next. Because even with all the special effects and nostalgia bait, there's one thing no franchise can afford to lose: momentum. The first Fantastic Beasts movie pulled in a solid $800 million. Not too shabby, right? But instead of being a launch pad, it ended up being the peak. The second movie, The Crimes of Grindelwald, made less. And by the time the third one dropped, it was clear the magic was fading faster than a disillusionment charm in a spotlight. People weren't lining up, they were logging out. See, the problem wasn't that the movies were bad, they just didn't feel essential. With the original Harry Potter films, you had to be there. Midnight releases, spoiler panic, pure fandom, chaos. But with Fantastic Beasts, it was more like, oh, that came out? Hey, I'll stream it later. Maybe. That slow fade of urgency is box office poison. And Warner Brothers drank it willingly. Sequels are supposed to build momentum, not leak it. But this franchise burned goodwill like it was cursed fiend fire. Each film tried to course correct, but ended up confusing people more. They weren't building a story, they were patching holes. Audiences can smell panic from a mile away, and the studio's desperation became more obvious with each release. By the time the third film was announced, even the most loyal Potterheads were saying, "Wait, we're still doing this?" That's when you know you've lost the room. And no matter how many magical duels or phoenix teases they threw in, the emotional investment was gone. The golden snitch had flown, and nobody was chasing it anymore. But you know what really made fans mad? Not the ticket prices, not even the confusing storylines. No, it was when the franchise started breaking its own rules, the sacred laws of the wizarding world. And when that happened, things went from disappointing to downright disrespectful. One thing Potter fans don't mess around with: canon. These are people who can quote Hogwarts, a history like it's scripture. So when Fantastic Beasts started bending the established rules, fans weren't just confused, they were offended. Suddenly Newt was expelled but still had a wand and could freely roam Hogwarts grounds. That's like saying Hagrid graduated top of his class. It just didn't add up. And let's talk about spells. In Goblet of Fire, it's made super clear. Accio doesn't work on living creatures. But there's Newt, casually summoning a giant beast like it's a flying teacup. You can practically hear Hermione screaming from across the timeline. These aren't tiny nitpicks, they're structural rules. Break them and the whole magical scaffolding starts to wobble. The worst part? These inconsistencies weren't even necessary. It's not like the plot had to ignore canon to move forward. It just felt lazy, like someone thought, they won't notice. But, oh, they noticed. If you're building on a universe that defined a generation, you can't treat it like a draft. The fans grew up. They remember everything. Even Dumbledore's age and timeline got messy. Suddenly, he's running around in sharp suits, looking like a brooding detective decades before he's supposed to be teaching transfiguration in robes. It's cinematic whiplash, and when timeline logic breaks down, emotional logic starts to crack too. People stop believing in the world because the world stops believing in itself. And that disbelief? It opens the door to a much deeper issue. If the story's rules don't matter, then neither do the consequences. So when the final act rolls around, and Grindelwald suddenly gets captured with suspicious ease, you can already guess where this is headed. Let's be honest. Fantastic Beasts had its moments. Visually, stunning. Soundtrack, magical. But narratively, a bit of a magical mess. The screenwriting often leaned on what we call convenient logic. When the plot needs something to happen, it just does. Like Grindelwald getting captured out of nowhere, as if the writers realized they had 5 minutes left and went, "All right, someone stun him." The worst offenders are those plot shortcuts that ignore logic just to move the story forward. Instead of tension, we get resolution handed on a silver platter. Remember how hard it was to catch Barty Crouch Jr. or even to expose Voldemort's return. Now compare that to how Grindelwald, a master manipulator, gets outplayed like a rookie. It kills the suspense. It cheapens the villain. These kinds of story decisions don't just affect one scene. They erode trust. If anything can happen at any time for no good reason, then why should the audience get emotionally invested? Stakes only matter when they're earned. And here, they were just handed out like free samples at Honeydukes. Here you go, a resolution. No need to work for it. It's like watching a chess game where one side suddenly pulls out a flamethrower. Sure, it's exciting for a second, but then you realize, wait, that's not how chess works. Good screenwriting makes you believe the unbelievable. Bad screenwriting reminds you you're watching something made up, and that's when the magic dies. And speaking of breaking the illusion, there was one real-world twist that not even the most creative writers could fix. A scandal so public, so polarizing, that it dragged the entire franchise into the courtroom of public opinion. Ah yes, the Johnny Depp dilemma, a plot twist the franchise didn't see coming but absolutely should have prepared for. Casting Depp as Grindelwald was already controversial, but what followed turned the series into a PR nightmare. Lawsuits, allegations, fan petitions. Suddenly the conversation wasn't about magical creatures, it was about courtroom drama. And when your fantasy saga starts trending on TMZ, something's gone very wrong. Fans were split. Some defended Depp fiercely, others felt his presence tainted the franchise. But the real issue wasn't even the casting, it was the handling. Warner Brothers dropped him like a hot cauldron, but not before filming had already begun. It felt abrupt. Like someone just yelled Expelliarmus on the entire casting process without warning or wand movement. And let's not forget the irony. J.K. Rowling initially supported Depp, publicly, loudly. Then, boom, he was gone. No graceful transition, no explanation that made real narrative sense. Just poof. Enter Mads Mikkelsen, who did his best with the role, but fans couldn't help feeling the whiplash. 1 second it's one face, the next it's another. It's like Polyjuice Potion, minus the potion and the logic. This wasn't just a casting change. It fractured the fan base and added a layer of real-world baggage that no spell could vanish. People weren't arguing about plot points anymore. They were arguing about moral stances and studio ethics. And in a franchise that was already narratively unstable, this just added gasoline to the flue powder fire. And while the Depp drama was loud, it wasn't the only sign of a franchise trying to juggle more than it could carry. Because behind the scenes, a much bigger gamble was brewing. One that would stretch the story way beyond its original intent. At first, Fantastic Beasts was planned as a trilogy. Solid idea, tight arc, manageable scope. But somewhere in a high-rise boardroom, someone got ambitious, or maybe just greedy, and said, let's make it 5 films. And just like that, a modest side story ballooned into an epic saga, without actually having an epic saga ready to tell. It was like stretching a chocolate frog into a dragon, messy and unnecessary. The problem with expanding too soon is that it exposes all the weaknesses. The pacing slowed down. Filler scenes crept in. Characters wandered without purpose. It felt less like a cohesive narrative, and more like studio executives trying to squeeze one more galleon from each ticket. You could almost hear the brainstorming session. We'll figure out the plot later, right? Spoiler alert, they didn't. This bloated plan also put pressure on the writers to stall, tease, and overcomplicate. Key events got delayed, conflicts, dragged out, and rather than deliver satisfying payoffs, each film ended with a shrug and a, "See you in 2 years." Fans aren't goldfish. They remember when you waste their time. And worse, they stop showing up when you do it more than once. It's one thing to build a 5-part story because the story demands it. It's another to build one because your spreadsheet says 5 is more profitable than 3. And that's exactly how this franchise started to feel. Like a financial strategy disguised as a screenplay. You could almost see the bullet points between scenes. Add more beasts. Hint at Dumbledore. Delay resolution. But that desperate overreach opened the door to something far more chaotic, something even magic couldn't control. The internet. Because when the story falls flat, the loudest voices aren't in theaters anymore. They're online, armed, with opinions, memes, and receipts. Once the cracks started to show in the franchise, the internet did what it always does. Amplified the chaos. Suddenly, every tweet, rumor, and half-baked theory became gospel. Headlines twisted statements. Clips got ripped out of context. And before you could say Alohomora, J.K. Rowling was at the center of controversy, again. Not for the plot, but for politics, opinions, and tweets. What made it worse was that fans couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. Some things were pulled from Pottermore, official content that had existed for years, but now, when rediscovered, they were treated like shocking reveals. Did you know Dumbledore is gay? Yeah. That's been public for over a decade. But in the age of viral outrage, context is usually the first casualty. This constant noise blurred the line between storytelling and social commentary. People weren't just reacting to the films. They were reacting to Rowling herself. Some fans started boycotting, others defended her, and many just got exhausted. The magic of the story couldn't compete with the noise outside the theater. And when audiences stop talking about the plot, that's when the plot officially stops mattering. Warner Brothers stayed mostly silent, hoping things would blow over. They didn't. The louder the internet got, the more disconnected the fandom felt. The community that once celebrated midnight premieres was now stuck in Twitter wars and YouTube rants. And while the fans argued, the studio fumbled, saying little and doing even less. And this silence, it didn't just linger, it echoed. Because after all the dust settled and the third film dropped with barely a splash, fans waited for answers. But what they got was absolutely nothing. After the release of The Secrets of Dumbledore, fans held their breath. Surely the studio would announce what's next, right? A teaser, a press release, even a vague more to come. But instead, silence. No updates, no interviews, no wand raised in the distance. Just the deafening, awkward kind of silence. That makes you wonder if someone accidentally cast Silencio on the whole franchise. And let's be clear, this wasn't just a PR slip. This was Warner Brothers ghosting its own fan base. People had invested years, energy, and emotions into this story, and suddenly it's like the franchise vanished into thin air. No closure, no direction. It felt less like the end of a chapter and more like the book was yanked out of your hands mid-sentence. That kind of radio silence doesn't just create disappointment. It breeds resentment. Fans weren't asking for miracles, just transparency. Even a, hey, we're figuring things out would have gone a long way. Instead, what they got was pure corporate awkwardness. Like when someone breaks up with you via OWL and never sends the letter. The worst part? There's actually so much story left to tell. Dumbledore and Grindelwald's final duel, the rise of wizard fascism, how it all ties to Voldemort's world. But without direction, or even a hint of commitment, it all just hangs there. Like a prophecy no one's willing to read aloud, and fans, once full of curiosity, are now filled with apathy. So here we are. A franchise that started with so much hope, tangled in narrative confusion, studio drama, and digital noise, and left in a state of magical limbo. But maybe, just maybe, this isn't the end. Maybe it's just the pause before something braver, smarter, and actually worth watching rises from the ashes. So now the question is yours. Do you think Fantastic Beasts deserves a second chance, or was the magic broken beyond repair? Should the story continue, or is it better left forgotten in the room of requirement? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, and I'd love to hear what you would have done differently if you were holding the wand. If this breakdown made you think twice about the series, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive like this one. And hey, if you're still wondering about the Elder Wand and all the mysteries surrounding it, tap on the video right here. Is it possible to make another Elder Wand? Trust me, you don't want to miss that answer.